Wisconsin Eye's coverage of Campaign 2014 is being brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice supporting Wisconsin hospitals in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye is the Dodgeville City Hall interviewing candidates in the 2014 elections. We're interviewing Ernie Wittwer. He's from Hill Point. He's a Democrat running in the 17th Senate District. Ernie, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Well, thank you for having me.
And just this note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 130 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Ernie, give us a short version of your bio. I know you're DOT budget director and why you're running.
Well, I was born and raised on a farm in western Dane County, back when western Dane County was still quite rural. I spent my life working for the state of Wisconsin. I was budget director at the DOT. I was chief of staff to the secretary. I was division administrator. So I've seen a fair amount of government at pretty high levels, and I've seen the nasty stuff happen in the Capitol. Spent the last several years working with the University of Wisconsin. I went over there as the director of their transportation center when they started that. And then the last few years I've been trying out retirement by working less than full time.
And is there any one set of issues that brought you into the 17th Senate District race?
There's a whole range of issues that brought me into the race. Basically, I'm just thoroughly disgusted with what's happening to our state. Our economy is weak at best. A whole bunch of people out there are having a very difficult time because of it. What's happening to our public schools is an outrage. And what's happening to our environment, or potentially happening to our environment, is also an outrage. So those are the three main issues that I'm focused on.
Well, where do we start? You talked about some of the recent bad decisions that have been made in the Capitol. What do you consider the worst among them, sir?
Oh, heavens. The worst among them, I think the policy that was in the last budget bill related to public education was very bad.
The expansion of vouchers and choice, sir?
Expanding of vouchers and choice.
Statewide?
In the previous budget, the slashing of funding for public education. Just about all the schools in this part of the state are in a very dire strait, in part because of the cuts, and in part because of the workings of the state AIDS formula, which basically, great simplification, but works on two factors. One is student enrollment, and the other is relative property values.
Property wealth, yes. And
both of those are going in the wrong direction insofar as getting money into this part of the state. So every school here, with one exception I believe, is a declining enrollment school. And so every week you read about one school or another having to cut staff, cut programs, and they're just hurting very much. So.
Well, one of the policy decisions that was made was to take vouchers and choice statewide with an enrollment cap of 1,000 outside two cities, you know, the city of Milwaukee and Racine.
Right.
If you were in the Senate, what would you do to the voucher program in the 2015-2017 budget, sir?
I think it ought to be repealed.
Would you keep it for those two major urban cities,
I think that's
Milwaukee, Racine?
I think that's a decision that would have to be influenced by the people down there. The studies that I've seen would suggest that it's not really working in Racine and Milwaukee either. So I think that ought to be on the table as well. But if the leaders of the education community in Milwaukee and Racine think it's working for them, then fine, let it work for them. But it's not working for the rest of the state. In fact, all it's doing is subsidizing decisions that parents have already made to send their kids to private schools or to homeschool them.
Well, there was a task force on rural schools. Now, you're a student of state government. If it were up to you, how would you fix the problems of rural schools, sir?
Well, first of all, I think the ideas that Tony Evers put forward in his fair funding formula
Fair funding?
Make a lot of sense. He would have included factors to deal with declining enrollment schools and poverty, two huge issues out here. Unfortunately, it's very, very difficult to change a funding formula unless you have enough money to hold people harmless.
It's got to be win-win.
Win-win, right, exactly. And so somehow I think we have to have a discussion about that in the Capitol and try to fix that formula, because otherwise you're going to have the tale of two schools. In fact, I saw an interesting paper written by the superintendent of one of the schools out here, who knows intimately one of the suburban schools in the Madison area. And he talked about the tale of two schools, because his school out here is cutting, and that school is relatively affluent yet. And that's not the kind of school system we want for the state of Wisconsin.
Another K-12 issue debated in the Capitol is Common Core standards. Do you support the current standards, sir?
I think that they make a lot of sense. To have standards that allow us to measure ourselves against other schools in other states and other regions makes a lot of sense. I think the great brouhaha that's come up about them has been largely political and largely baseless.
Governor Walker and the leaders of the Senate and the Assembly told the federal government, we don't want your money to pay for an expansion of MA. Wise or not so wise a choice?
Very unwise choice. A lot of people require assistance. And for example, I talked to a man the other day who takes a lot of drugs, and he just got kicked off of Badger Care. And he has $9,000 a month drug bill.
A month?
A month. And he has no resources to pay for that. So what are we saying to that person?
Can he enroll under the Affordable Care Act?
He could, if he could afford it, but you know, he's one of those people who's in the sort of the notch between the 100% and the 130%, and you know, it's probably not a viable option for him either.
What's he going to do with it?
I have no idea what he's going to do, and he doesn't either.
My goodness. Okay, so state of Wisconsin should still avail itself of the federal offer to pay for the cost of expanding MA.
Yes.
Okay. Well, now let's come back to where you spent most of your career at DOT.
Okay.
Projected $650 million shortfall in the next biennium, 2015, 2017. Delay some of these projects or find what additional source of money, sir?
Well, I think we have to have, I never thought I'd be saying this about Wisconsin, but I think we have to have a fundamental conversation with ourselves about whether or not we're going to invest in our infrastructure or whether we're going to let it go down the tube. And I think if we have that discussion rationally with the people of the state, they'll say we have to find the resources. And if they say we have to find the resources, you know, you can go back to the normal sources, the excise tax on gasoline and the registration fee. Those are the two primary sources of revenue in the state. I don't think most people realize that if you were to plug that hole solely with the gasoline tax, for example, you're talking about a 10 to 11 cent increase in the fuel tax.
And that hasn't been increased, I think, since 2006?
2006, when the indexing provision was repealed, yes.
Yes, sir.
But
to be clear, you're not saying we should raise our gas tax 10 or 11 cents, are you?
No, I'm not saying
Okay.
that. I'm just
Excuse
saying that if we were to do it solely with that mechanism and really try to plug the hole, that's what it would require. Other ideas have been tossed about. I know Secretary Gottlieb has been talking about a VMT tax.
Yes. Every time you and I send in our $75 or whatever it is to register our cars, we tell DOT how many miles we travel.
Yes, and so many pennies a mile or whatever it is you pay for those miles of travel.
Good idea, bad idea?
Conceptually, it's a great idea. Practically, I doubt that it's ever going to fly because, you know, if you drive $40,000 or 40,000 miles a year and you have to write a check for, you know, whatever it is, 1 penny a mile, that's going to be extremely unpopular. You know, that kind of...
You think we drivers would not tell the truth?
I think many would not tell the truth.
Honor system not the best proposal?
Probably not.
Okay.
Yes. So anyway, we just have to decide what we're going to do. Your question about delaying projects, I'm a firm believer in maintaining what you have before you build more stuff. So yes, if there are large projects ongoing that can be delayed, I mean, the problem is, can they be delayed? Because you've got some that are, you know, half done. You don't want to stop a project that's in mid-course. Yes, they should be delayed. And we have to look at the way we're financing transportation because we're using so much debt now. In the next biennium, we're going to be up to about $1.05 of our transportation revenues being used for debt service. That's just...
Unsustainable.
Unsustainable, yes.
Sounds like the state of New Jersey. Go ahead, excuse me.
Well, when I was in charge of the state transportation budget, you know, when it got up to 5–6% for debt service, I started getting uncomfortable. We had bankers from all over the country telling us that, you know, we ought to invest more and use more debt. Well, you can do that up to a point, but after a while, it's just not sustainable, as you say.
Okay. Judge Crabb recently ruled that the constitutional prohibition against same-sex marriage is unconstitutional. Your reaction, sir?
I think she's got it right. I think we all know gay and lesbian couples who are probably the most stable couples that in our acquaintance. I see no reason why they shouldn't have the same rights and privileges as straight couples.
Is frac sand mining an issue in the 17th
Well,
Senate
it's
District?
a huge issue down here.
Do we need more rules and regs, or do you need to tell local governments there's a limit on what they, how they can regulate?
I think we should leave the local governments alone and let them do the regulation. They're the ones who understand what's happening on the ground. They're the ones who have to respond to the people who are complaining about dust or noise or light pollution, truck traffic on school bus routes and all those kinds of things. And I think counties and towns are the ones who are in the best position to regulate that. I think there is a role for some state regulation as well. Unfortunately, the DNR's rules on non-metallic mining are really written for the old-fashioned sand and gravel pits that we use for construction for years. And they're really not up to date for the huge industrial mines that we're seeing now.
While we're talking about mining, the 17th Senate District includes the Baraboo Hills, doesn't it? I've heard...
No, it doesn't.
It used to.
It used to, yes.
But here's my question. Senator Schultz voted against the mining bill. How would you have voted?
I would have voted against that.
Why?
It's terrible public policy to basically suspend our environmental rules to the point where even the Corps of Engineers says they won't cooperate with our DNR because our rules are so lax. And, if we're going to do mining in this state, it ought to be done in a way that's environmentally sensitive and as benign as possible. I mean, by its nature, mining is not benign to the environment, but it can be more or less so. And to simply say, full speed ahead, we're going to have a mine up there is not good public policy.
Two candidates for Attorney General say first offense drunken driving should be a crime. Your position, sir?
It should not be.
Should not be. Why?
Well, Wisconsin has sort of an alcohol culture, and I don't think there's hardly anybody I know who can honestly say that they've never driven with a blood alcohol level above 0.08. And to criminalize that, I think would put a whole bunch of people into the criminal system in a way that we don't need. I mean, we already lock up way too many people in this state for crimes that have no victims, as it were. So I think that would just be a step in the wrong direction. Right now, if you have an OWI offense, it costs you thousands of dollars in court costs and fines. It costs you thousands of dollars in enhanced insurance premiums. So there's already a big penalty. And I'm not sure that criminalizing it is going to make much of a difference.
There's a push in both Washington and Madison to raise the minimum wage. Your position, sir?
It should be raised.
It should be raised.
Yeah, we have to have people.
How high?
How high? Well, I think the $10.10 figure that's been tossed about is sort of the minimum that it should go up. Because we have to have people who are able to make a living wage. If you're willing to work 40 or 50 hours a week, you ought to be able to support yourself and not be dependent on food stamps or Medicaid or other things like that to make ends meet. And right now, you have a lot of companies that are taking advantage of a weak labor market and really screwing things down for their employees. So I think an enhanced minimum wage is necessary.
Any other major issues in your campaign that I haven't asked about, Mr. Wittwer?
Well, you haven't asked about the economy.
How do you create jobs in the 17th?
How do you create jobs in the 17th? Well, first of all, you get back to a realistic, progressive tax policy. Every time Governor Walker and his cronies in the legislature have touched the tax code, it's done very little for the common person out here, and it's benefited the wealthy people. The wealthy people don't have the same propensity to consume as poorer people do, which means you're taking money out of the economy. So I think you have to change that around.
What's the number one change in tax policy we need, sir?
Basically getting back to that progressivity that Wisconsin's always had. Okay. The last changes consolidated categories and had the effect of making it closer to a flat tax.
Okay. One of your supporters at the Democratic Convention came up and said he resents the fact that State Chairman Mike Tate and Senate Democratic Leader Larson both mentioned your opponent and not you. Is the party unfairly supporting your opponent in the primary, Mr. Wittwer?
Well, the party's constitution says that it doesn't get into primaries, and yet they've gotten into primaries all over the place, including my own. As I've told other people, I think Chris Larson's action is probably a boon to my campaign, because people out here don't like to be told how to vote, and they particularly don't like Madison and Milwaukee politicians telling them how to vote. So I have energized volunteers like I haven't had energized volunteers before because of his comments.
And then finally, I want to give you a chance to highlight differences between you and your primary opponent, sir.
Well, the primary difference between me and my primary opponent is that I have 40 years of experience and he doesn't. I lived in the district for a long time and he hasn't. I have good ties to lots and lots of people out here and he doesn't. So it's a question of whether you want someone who's a little bit older and a little bit wiser and a little bit more experienced and with more ties, or do you want someone who's come into the district quite recently, run for office twice, or this is the second time already, and who doesn't have those ties. So that's the choice that the people out here have.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Ernie Wittwer, I'll get it right, excuse me, of Hill Point, is a Democratic candidate in the 17th Senate District, and the primary is August 12th.
12th, right.
Wittwer. See, I got your name right.
That's right.
I apologize.
Don't mispronounce my name, of all things.
Okay. Thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.